not a member of any organized political party. I am a Democrat. Will Rogers, of course, first quoted in 1935, quoted posthumously, in fact, which is completely appropriate given how the rest of us feel right now. I am afraid it is going to keep going exactly like this until Joe Biden withdraws or until all doubts are erased. And as we contemplate the upcoming NATO news conference, please tell me how all doubts would ever be erased. First, in this sequence of events, this Sisyphus and the hill and the rock jazz, the withdrawal talk will have been tamped down, or those talking it will have been bludgeoned and shamed, basically where we were on Monday. Then it will rise up again, courtesy of the amazed, those who are amazed that it quieted down when things seem so obvious to them. Then someone with actual power here, like, say, Nancy Pelosi, will say something in code, indirectly, to the president via television that sounds like maybe you should think about getting out, but then she will dilute her own words a few minutes later to a different source. Then a few electeds will insist he leave, or they will seem to insist. Then celebrity Democrats like, say, George Clooney will chime in, and everybody can make the same joke about it, like, good night and good luck, Joe. And then somebody, and yesterday it was an uninformed candidate for the Senate from New Jersey, will wonder out loud and get into print if there is some way to force Joe Biden off the ticket, and there isn't. And the whole thing will calm down for as long as a day, maybe 36 hours, and then a day or 36 hours later, it'll all start up all over again, and the cycle will keep going through the beginning of November. The only variety to the equation of evasion, will be when we hit those moments of existential dread. Like today, like Mr. Biden's scheduled news conference at the NATO summit. Oh, what's on his schedule today? Oh, nothing much. Just another bottomless pit he can fall into and take us with him. Oh, and even if he doesn't fall in, we'll get like 12 to 24 hours of every one of his words being parsed on every news channel like they were from a newly discovered parchment from the Dead Sea Scrolls. No, you're right, but don't use that Dead Sea Scrolls analogy where everybody can hear you. We're trying to avoid talking about his age. On February 28, 2023, Catherine Joan Bedingfield retired as Joe Biden's White House communications director to become head of the Environmental Defense Action Fund. She was once campaign spokesperson for John Edwards, which really means she was campaign spokeswoman for the late Elizabeth Edwards, who should have been president. She worked in the Obama administration. She worked with Vice President Biden. She was deputy manager of his 2020 campaign. And if you can imagine this, I used to work for her father when he was an executive at CNN in my second stint there about 2 decades ago. And he very well might have been the only sane one in management there. So she is not a person of extremes or panic or indiscretion. And thus what she said yesterday matters more to me, and I hope more to you, than does what Nancy Pelosi said. I know firsthand better than almost anyone, Ms. Bedingfield writes, how smart the Biden team is about data and about ignoring the noise. They are right that the game here is to convince voters, not pundits. But when the battle over the public data is so overwhelmingly negative, it's a good moment to put forward your theory of the case. If they have data that supports the path to victory that they see, they should put it out there now and help people who badly want to beat Trump rally around it. People want to see the path. Well, exactly. Less hand-wringing, less, where's your loyalty? Less, nobody gets to tell Biden what to do. More data. The irony is there is data supporting the go with Joe conclusion. And again, I remain agnostic about this, but Northeastern University is experimenting with advanced data and putting it together with polling. They call it Chip 50, and the key to it isn't that advanced, actually. It's not ask bunches of people several times a year. It's ask the same bunch of people several times a year. and doing so before and after the debate, to quote the Chip 50 report, finds that Biden held on to 94% of the people who said they would support him before the debate. For Trump, 86% of people who said they would support him before the debate said they would do so after the debate. Project leader, Northeastern professor David Lazar, says don't get too excited. Quoting him, what we see is that there is some churn, maybe 10% or so of people change what they answer, but that the net result is not a movement away from Biden. If anything, it seems that Biden is holding on to his people somewhat better than Trump. Now, this is not decisive, and if it is relevant to the big question, before the debate, Biden needed to grow his voter support, not just maintain it. If this is relevant to that, it's only tangentially so. But where's the White House on this? Don't hit Democrats over the head with guilt or by pulling rank on them. This is the president's decision. Hit them over the head with retained support metrics. Weighted retained support. 94% is a hell of a lot of percent. Tell people about it. And tell people how the Biden campaign sees it as a starting point for winning the election and burying Trump in the metaphorical quicksand. I said in February, and I said the night of the debate, and I said immediately after that the worst outcome was the scenario in which this all played out in public, and Biden dug in, and those who doubted him kept coming back every 48 hours and saying, oh, what about now? Are you leaving now? And yet here we are. What about now? You're going to leave now? And the most powerful voices in the Democratic Party are themselves participating in this, playing this game, except it's not a game, it's a deadly dance. In February, Axios reported, quote, when White House aides appear on MSNBC's Morning Joe, they're often booked between 7 and 7:40 a.m. ET. That's so they'll reach one crucial and loyal viewer, President Biden. Unquote. Well, guess what? Yesterday, Nancy Pelosi went on that show at 7:39 a.m. ET.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short. I think overwhelming support of the caucus. It's not for me to say. I'm not the head of the caucus anymore. But he's beloved. He is respected, and people want him to make that decision, not me.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do, and that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with. I think it's really important, and I would hope everyone would join in, to let him deal with this NATO conference. This is a very big deal. Over 30 heads of state are here. He is the host of it, and that means not just hosting, it means orchestrating the discussion and setting the agenda, and he's doing so magnificently. And I've said to everyone, let's just hold off. Whatever you're thinking, either tell somebody privately, but you don't have to put that out on the table until we see how we go this week.
A clip from the best part of MSNBC's Morning Joe, the part where there was no Joe Scarborough. 7:39 a.m. to speak to the proverbial audience of one. And when Nancy Pelosi showed up at her office hours later, she told ABC News, yes, she does think Biden can win. And she told CBS, I think the president is great, and there are some misrepresentations of what I have said. I never said he should reconsider his decision. The decision is the president's. I don't know what's happened in the New York Times that they make up news, but if that's why you're here, it isn't true, unquote. So she said one thing in a very specifically fuzzy way, if you can forgive that contradiction in terms, presumably just to get the president's eyebrows to raise. Obviously, the point is she said he should make a decision. And of course, he has not only insisted for 10 days now that he's made his decision, but he put his decision in writing and sent it to all the congressional Democrats on Monday. And Nancy Pelosi is still a congressional Democrat. So why did she ask him to make a decision he's already made? And then kind of walk that back while she was not on his favorite television show. And I guess we should be happy that his favorite television show is not The Munsters. So it alarms him. So it gets a message through the bubble to Joe Biden without making it look like Nancy Pelosi is providing a platform or encouragement for the Joe must go crowd. Not encouraging them yet, anyway, and managing to do so before a meeting scheduled today between Biden aides and worried Democratic senators. Let's see how many of them show up to that. Yes, all of a sudden, the Democrats are doing exactly what the Republicans do when they want to get a message to Trump. Go on TV and talk to the guy. And yes, there are many comparisons between Sean Hannity and Joe Scarborough. There's one other thing here, though, that Pelosi mentioned. If Biden were to choose to go, he certainly would not have done it before the NATO summit ended. He loves NATO. It's kind of an obvious statement to say, well, he's not going to do it before the NATO thing ends. Well, the NATO thing ends today. He's not going to go back in time and do it. I suppose the whole thing is an informal attempt to soften Biden up, to encourage him and him alone to bow out, or at least to see if it's possible that he might do that. I am comforted, as an aside really, only by the fact that this idea, the use TV to twist a phrase, the medium is the messenger, that it's not new. In fact, you are alive today in no small part because of the chief diplomatic correspondent of ABC News in 1962, a man named John Scali, and the fact that President Kennedy watched Scali's reports, and the chief KGB hood in Washington, Alexander Fomin, watched his reports. And when Premier Khrushchev needed a back channel to Kennedy to find some other way out of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis other than, blowing the world up, Fomin told Khrushchev they should just go use John Scali. So Fomin met Scali at a diner and pitched the essence of the deal that ultimately, saved the world from being blown up. And they talked about it over a ham sandwich. A service of ABC News. Still, using television news people to decide the fate of humanity. What a way to run a railroad or a nation. The White House, of course, is proving the bromide that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. The taped interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC last week, which was somehow supposed to address the president's failure in a live group setting, a one-on-one taped interview, which produced more indistinct responses, added to the confusion. One horrifying answer in which Biden clearly accepted the idea of losing to Trump rather than saying, over my dead body or something similar. And as if that fix-it project had not resulted in more damage that night, Stephanopoulos was then asked by some rando with a camera phone rolling on the streets of New York if he thought Biden should or could serve another 4-year term. And rather than saying, it's not my job to say that, George said, no, he didn't. And it had been uploaded to TMZ within hours. The White House clearly thinks that all went well. They have now booked something totally different. A pre-taped interview with NBC. Lester Holt. Because that can't wind up like the one with George. The one with George was on ABC at 8 p.m. This one will be on at 9 on NBC. Honest to God, I do not think the President of the United States has any genuine cognitive issues None. I think he gets tired, and various speech problems are catching up with him at age 81, like various speech problems are catching up with me at age 65. I have only one doubt about one corner of his sanity, which is that he thinks Scarborough knows what he's talking about and is honest. But I do have a series of questions about those around him making decisions like this one about the NBC interview. I mean, if this goes poorly too, if Holt on a Friday is as bad as Stephanopoulos on the previous Friday, if the Biden campaign then goes to brainstorm for hours to figure out what to do next, and then somebody says, fellas, I got it. CBS, put him on CBS. That's got to work. This is simple. News conferences. One a week. Live. No taped interviews. Or town halls, live. If he does well, this actually could all go away. If he doesn't, well, there's your answer right there. And while I understand that the words of elected Democrats have to be restrained and that a solution to this, either with the president staying on the ticket or leaving the ticket, that it rests on a certain gentleness. While everybody is tiptoeing around this and Hakeem Jeffrey says, yes, Biden can win, but these are family discussions. You can almost see him doing the little button gesture with his lips. The rest of the neighborhood is burning to the ground, and nobody is being quiet about that. Clooney's op-ed in the Times begets more concern trolling from goddamn David Axelrod, who is becoming the Mark Penn of Pat Caddell's. And the genuine aspects of this crisis beget anonymous quotes to places like NBC News, in which sources close to the campaign say donations have, quote, absolutely shut off. That's a problem. Journalism, or whatever our American system is, abhors a vacuum, and celebrity op-eds and bad news and leaks become the only news if you are quiet forever. Because while that Northeastern study is really insightful and positive, Politico reported bad polling for Biden here in New York. Just an 8-point lead in this state. And now, per the independent journalist Jacqueline Sweet, Biden down in internal Democratic polling in 3 swing congressional districts now held by Republicans. Districts that Biden won 4 years ago, down by 1 point in the 22nd, down by double digits in the 17th and the 19th. And for God's sakes, please follow Kate Bedingfield's advice. I, for one, do not object to President Biden trying to hold on to the nomination like our lives depended on it. I would like to see him recognize, though, that it is actually the election upon which our lives depend. And as Ms. Bedingfield suggests, tell us what the plan is electorally. One last piece of advice for the Biden campaign and for the Get Rid of Biden campaign as well. You are both moving towards the point of no return. And in our environment, the easiest way to identify that moment is the moment at which major news organizations, already corrupted by their corporate masters, no longer feel the need to make the slightest attempt to hide the fact that they are in the tank, partially or completely, for Trump and for fascism, and they are corporations. They don't even think about the nation. They just think about their profits. We are approaching that moment. In fact, we may have already arrived at it. I will never back away from my contention that the lead story the night of the CNN debate was not Biden's failures, nor even Trump's fire hose of lies, but the fact that CNN not only agreed to, but seemingly offered to not fact-check anything, not even occasionally. I have suggested here since this podcast began 2 years and 20 days ago that some upper echelon of the companies that own every significant news organization in this country have had the same meeting in which the prospect of Trump seizing power again and thus this nation going fully fascist is addressed, and the true threat is confronted in the boardrooms of our masters. So, of course, to the people who own the New York Times and the people who own the Washington Post and the people who own NBC, and especially the right-wingers who comparatively newly own CNN, they will perceive the true threat as the threat to their profits. Is that why Jake Tapper and Dana Bash failed the minimum test of journalism? No. Did the owner go to them and say, you can't say this? No. Did the owner go to one of their bosses' bosses and say that? You bet your ass. When I was at NBC, the calls used to come from the president of NBC, Bob Wright, directly to the executive producer of my show, Phil Griffin. Asked about the upcoming presidential election, writes Bloomberg News from the annual Sun Valley Billionaires Retreat in Idaho, David Zaslav, CEO of Warner Bros. Discovery, the man who brought you Chris Licht, the man who brought you the 2023 CNN Live Town Hall and Trump infomercial, financed by the fascist John Malone. David Zaslav, quote, said it mattered less to him which party wins as long as the next president was friendly to business. Quote, we just need an opportunity for deregulation so companies can consolidate and do what we need to be even better, unquote. Zaslav did not add Trumpland, Uber alles, because he didn't need to. That part can be safely assumed. Also of interest here, well, of course, one of Trump's longest-standing confidants finally said it. One of them was going to. Just a question of which one. If you ever wonder why we cannot let Trump regain the controls no matter what, just remember that one of his henchmen has now called the Vice President of the United States, the possible next President of the United States, Kamala Harris, quote, colored, unquote. It only remains to see now if you can correctly choose from a few options as to who it was. When I say a few options, I mean like 5,000 or 6,000. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, since I just invoked corporate greed and corporate fascism and corporate influence over the news, it's a good time to tell again the story of my great-grandfather, who accidentally gave away at least $60 or $70 million in about 2 minutes. But it's okay, because the money went to a major American corporation. Things I promised not to tell coming up, but first there's still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The Bronze, worse, the Federalist Society, and Project 2025. Trump may be pretending he knows nothing of a document that made me think of the Gestapo Black Book, which they prepared for their invasion of London that never happened. It had the names and addresses of 3,000 British citizens and organizations that were to be immediately rounded up or just shot. And the Black Book included everybody from Winston Churchill to the Rotary Club. Well, the cat is kind of out of the bag about who knows what about Project 2025. Let me quote, while former President Trump has attempted to distance himself from Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank behind the policy plan, is on full display at the Republican National Convention. The Heritage Foundation signed on to the RNC as a convention sponsor. The group plans to host a policy fest in downtown Milwaukee on Monday, which is the day Trump will become the nominee of the Republican Party, and a following social event at a nearby bar. Who's reporting that? The Washington Examiner, the right-wing news outlet. Do they seem to be hiding it at all? By the way, hey, can we get Somebody to send copy of Project 2025 over to David Zaslav at Warner Bros. Discovery. No. No, tell him we want. Yeah, tell him I want to know if he has any notes, any additions, anything he'd like, anything he doesn't like. Zaslav, like a Z as in Nazi. The runners-up, Exoplanet HD 189733b, because it stinks. This may be the first time I've made a planet, the entirety of a planet, the worst persons in the world. Because, of course, they're not in the world. They're in the universe. And they're an entire planet. So they'd actually be the worst persons in another world. Anywho, scientists made an exciting and pungent announcement about a nearby exoplanet this week. According to news reports, planetary body with a likeness to Jupiter has one small problem. It smells of rotten eggs. Analyzing data gathered by the James Webb Space Telescope, scientists discovered that exoplanet HD 189733b contains hydrogen sulfide, a colorless gas emitted by decaying organic matter with a strong egg-like odor. In addition to hydrogen sulfide, researchers found carbon dioxide, oxygen, water, and heavy metals in the unique exoplanet's atmosphere, according to what was published in Nature magazine on Monday. It was initially discovered in 2005. It is located approximately 65 light-years from Earth in the constellation Vulpecula. So you just just go out here, make a left at the light, and then go up the FDR for 65 light-years. Some days that'll only get you to 96th Street, near the constellation Vulpecula. Thought that was a hockey player's name, Vulpecula. A defenseman with the Phoenix Roadrunners of the WHA. Now, the reports we're getting here, all quoting Nature, have been cleaned up. They say that the place smells like rotten eggs. The BBC World News report on this was a little less coy. It noted in a priceless, eternal on-screen graphic that, quote, the hydrogen sulfide on HD 189733b is also found in farts, unquote. This is the BBC. Farts. Speaking of which, the winner, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, the former advisor to the Hungarian fascist Viktor Orban, the former Steve Bannon ass-kisser, the guy who dyes his gray hair and gray beard with, some of Rudy Giuliani's leftover shoe polish, the scumbag so scumbaggish he was actually fired by the Trump White House 8 months in last time, the human fart, who has still lingered around the fringes of the fascist community as an online commentator who is there to make sure the fascists continue to hate the right people, the asshole who wore the Nazi-related tunic medal to Trump's inauguration in 2016, and he's the one who said it. Listen to what he's called Kamala Harris.
Do these donors really think that Kamala Harris is going to do better in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania than Joe Biden would? I mean, that's the because it can't be anybody else, right?
Hey, Rob, you're being logical. Stop it, all right? She's a DEI hire, right? She's a woman. She's colored, therefore she's got to be good.
That's right. Sebastian Gorka has called the Vice President of the United States, whom he is not as smart as nor as successful, a DEI hire. And he has called her, quote, colored, unquote. There are several unpleasant aspects to the possible replacement of Joe Biden on the Democratic ticket. When I say several, I mean several hundred. But there is at least one absolute positive. Making Kamala Harris the presidential nominee, or better yet, the president, in the event of an actual Biden retirement, would be irresistible to the stains of this world like Sebastian Gorka, and they would out themselves as the stinking, oxygen-wasting, human fart planets that they really are. In the interim, he's just Sebastian the racist Gorka, today's worst person in the world. Hey, maybe you'd like to, Sebastian, you want to take a quick trip to HD 189733b? Yeah, it's 65 light years away, so it's going to be a one-way trip. Mother... the top of the countdown and the number one story and my favorite topic, me, and what is some much-needed comic relief today, I think, though my late father would never have agreed with that statement. Not at all. My great-grandfather told this story something like every day until he died. It was legendary in the family. There is considerable circumstantial evidence that it is all true. And the last possible date that it could have happened was 114 years ago, last Friday, September 16th, 1908. Antoni Zielinski was born in Krakow in Poland in 1868. My sister just found some evidence that he changed the way his name was spelled, that it was originally Zelensky, with two Y's or two I's at the end, just like the Ukrainian president. We're kind of pleased with her discovery. Antony, or as my father nicknamed him, the great financier, was a natural musician. He could sing, play any instrument. He could compose music and lyrics. He could teach you how to play. He could build or repair anything from a kazoo to a grand piano. And that, from his late teens, is how he made his money. He traveled all around Europe from maybe 1886 onwards, staying at rich people's houses for several days, teaching the girls how to sing and the boys how to play whatever was lying around the house, fixing the family harpsichord, cobbling together the odd flute. One day, we're guessing around 1889, 1890, he traveled to the home of well-off merchants in Odessa, then part of Russia, the Shevchenkos. He taught the boys how to sing and the girls how to play the organ, and then he fell in love with the youngest daughter, Matrona. The Shevchenkos were not happy when they discovered them in love and chased my great-grandfather and their daughter out of the house, out of the city, and out of the country. Antony went home to Poland, married his child bride, returned to Krakow, where all of his family then chased them out of that house, out of that city, and out of that country. Get lost with you and your Russian whore, he would later tell the nephew for whom my father was named, Teddy. Antony and Matrona had to think fast. It's 1889, 1890. Where's a hard-working guy thrown out of Russia and Poland going to go? They arrived in New York City within weeks. As I said, he was a natural musician. He picked up English quickly, and supposedly within a month or two, he was leaving his wife, my great-grandmother, in an apartment in the Bronx and getting on trains for distant cities as far west as Chicago, going to the rich people's homes and getting $100 to teach them music, write music, repair musical instruments, and then get right back on the train to New York. Though he earned a very good income doing this, especially for an immigrant, Antony and Matrona lived frugally, often without hot water in their home, because my great-grandfather was now driven to avenge himself. Daddy, he would tell his nephew, who told my dad, I save every dollar I can save. I invest in the safest investment in the world, the Polish national bonds. For one day I shall return to Krakow. I shall buy the biggest house on top of the biggest hill and stand outside all day, waving my money at my relatives who made me and your aunt leave and saying to them, F you. This is my goal. And on this went for a decade and more, until he went to Flint, Michigan to do his usual routine, to stay at the house of a prosperous American, write a family song, repair the broken tuba, teach the kids to play the guitar, and generally delight the family. In this case, the family of a businessman who he remembered as Mr. Billy. Came the end of my great-grandfather's stay with Mr. Billy in Michigan and his family in Michigan, and Mr. Billy was so taken with Antony Zielinski that he took him personally to the train station in Flint and went with him onto the platform to wait for the train. Mr. Zielinski, he said, we have been delighted to have you here, that I would be honored if you would accept, instead of the $500 I owe you, please take $1,000 in stock certificates from my business, my way of saying thanks and hoping you can return and visit us again. My great-grandfather said he was almost moved to tears by the gesture. But, Mr. Billy, he explained, I live very inexpensively and I invest all my money in the world's safest investment, the Polish national bonds. Mr. Billy congratulated Antony on his prudence, but said, I believe I am at the cusp of the next great business in this country. I would again offer you this stock. I think you will make so much money that you could buy all the Polish national bonds. My great-grandfather, standing there on the train station in Flint, Michigan, thought for a moment. I know, Mr. Billy, you mentioned you own a manufactory in town. What is this you manufacture? Mr. Billy said, we are in the automobile business, Mr. Zelensky. My great-grandfather lit up. Ah, yes, the streets of New York are filled with automobiles. This is the coming thing. But I will still take the cash and invest in the world's safest investment, the Polish national bonds. The train was late. There was an awkward silence now between them, which my great-grandfather finally broke. Do I know the name of your company, Mr. Billy? And Mr. Billy replied, well, that's the topic of the moment, Mr. Zelensky, and I must say, having gotten to know you a little bit, I'm not at all surprised you brought this subject up. Currently, my company is called Buick Motor Cars. My great-grandfather said, ah, yes, Buick. I've heard of Buick. You're changing the name? Not exactly, said Mr. Billy. I believe the automotive business is going to grow exponentially, but we have one large company in the field, Ford, and we have dozens of smaller ones like Buick, and I'm about to buy up several of my competitors and form one big company, bigger than Ford, and we will dominate automobiles for decades to come. Ah, yes, said my great-grandfather. And what will you call this behemoth? Mr. Billy laughed. Again, you cut to the heart of the matter, Mr. Zelensky. We are debating that right now. We need a name that expresses our national stature. My great-grandfather shook his head at the obviousness of this. The problem is an easy one, no? You use national motor cars. Mr. Billy laughed. Again, your insight is extraordinary. That was our first thought as well. But would you believe there is a company in Indiana, of all places? They make electric automobiles, which will never work, and they're called National Motor Vehicles. We need another name. American is also taken. Continental is taken. Damn it, Mr. Zelensky, we can't think of a good name that isn't already taken. My great-grandfather, who had just turned down the stock, and $1,000 worth of the stock in this company, thought for a second. You wish to express the national, the American, the broadly available or available, national, continental, national, what is the word in English? The general availability of your vehiculars. Well, Mr. Billy, why not that? Why not general automobiles, general automotive, general motor car, maybe General Motors? Now it was time for Mr. Billy to become pensive. Finally, he spoke. General Motors. It does have a certain ring to it, Mr. Zelensky. Oh, look, here's your train. Mr. Billy was, of course, Billy Durant, and he owned Durant Dort, and then he owned Buick, and then he consolidated 13 auto manufacturers and 10 parts and accessory companies together into, as it was called on the day Billy and his partners opened the escrow account, Wednesday, September 16, 1908, General Motors Holding Company. My great-grandfather, having gotten another $500 to invest in the world's safest investment, instead of $1,000 in stock in not General Motors in 1908, but the company that would become General Motors, and having given its chairman the name General Motors for free, waved goodbye, got on the train, returned to New York. He died 15 years later, and to his credit, we know of the detail of this story because the person who told it to everyone with a laugh, with a warning to his relatives that none of them had the genes of a businessman either, was my great-grandfather himself. Needless to say, this good, self-deprecating humor makes him my favorite of all my ancestors. And I hope wherever he went when he died in 1923, his humor went with him, because there were several postscripts to this story that lend it authenticity and induce further rage in his descendants. My father was very much alive in 1940. He was an 11-year-old boy with his Uncle Teddy, Antony's nephew, living with my dad and grandparents and my uncles in the Bronx. My dad, who did not meet his grandfather, Antony Zelensky, said there was a knock on the apartment door one day, and he opened it to the sight, as he put it, of the two best suits of clothing I had ever seen. The men wearing them asked for my dad's uncle. He got him, and the men began to speak Polish to Uncle Teddy. Gentlemen, we are here in America. You will please speak English in front of my family. Mr. Zelensky, one of them said, we know that your uncle left you his investments in Polish national bonds. He was obviously a great patriot. We represent the Polish government in exile. When we run the Nazis out of our homeland and freedom is again ours, I know your uncle would have, and you would, want the free Polish national state to not be burdened financially, to be unburdened, in fact, to the greatest possible degree. Mr. Zelensky, your uncle was the fourth largest private investor in Polish national bonds in North America. In fact, he was just behind the National Bank of Mexico. Will you retire his bonds for a nominal fee as a great Polish patriot? My dad was never sure how nominal the fee was, but he was convinced his uncle got less than $500 for what was at least $100,000 in bonds due in the year 1950 or later. My dad did not spend his life wondering about his grandfather's magnificent moment of investment stupidity, but it would occasionally wake him in the middle of the night. And on his nightly commutes from Manhattan to our little home in the suburbs, he came to know the other regulars on the train, just like Don Draper did on Mad Men. Same train, in fact. And one of the regulars on the train turned out to be a stock historian. Eventually, Dad told him the story of Anthony Zelensky and Billy Durant and General Motors, and the stock historian invited him to stop by the office at lunch one day. Sit down, Ted. And I mean, sit down, Ted. The historian showed his math. This was what $1,000 in Buick in 1908 turned into when Billy Durant created General Motors in 1908. And here's where it split. And here's where it split again. And here's where it quartered after they forced Durant out. And then he bought Chevrolet and he came back in and took over General Motors again. And it split. And my father said he started to sweat. Just tell me already. Ted, the $1,000 your great-grandfather turned down in General Motors in 1908 would now be worth approximately $60 million. My father said he struggled to not pass out. His friend from the train then said, plus the value of the name. I can't get that exactly, the stock historian said, but it's got to be another couple million, 5, 10 maybe, especially if he'd taken stock in exchange for the name. There's one more twist to the knife. Well, so far, there's still plenty of time for more. When the unions ran the Soviets out of Poland and Lech Walesa became president of the Free Poland in 1990, he gave a speech establishing the new government. He spoke naturally in Polish. Until, that is, it was time to address one topic. The president read that part of the speech in English. My government will recognize and honor the following years of the Polish national bonds. My father called me in Los Angeles that night. He had spoken to his stock historian friend again and gotten a new rough estimate. My great-grandfather had turned down $60, maybe $70 million in General Motors stock to keep, say, $100,000 in Polish bonds due in the year 1950. And Lech Walesa had just said, we'll pay on those bonds that were due in 1950. And so if great-grandfather's nephew, Teddy, had just sat on them, those bonds would have been worth $5 or $6 million. Keith, my father said quietly, let me remind you again what the great financier, my grandfather, told everyone, told all of us. None of us have the genes of a businessman. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards, produced by TKO Brothers, and it was not sponsored by General Motors. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, were arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Stevie Van Zandt, and everything else was pretty much my fault. Except for the GM part, which was my great-grandfather's. That's Countdown for this, the 118th day until the 2024 presidential election. and the 1,281st day since convicted felon Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. You've got it, Mr. President. Use presidential immunity against him to stop him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.